Guten Tag, I'm Andy Clarke and welcome back to Stuff and Nonsense. I'm a designer and on this channel I study work from designers outside the web, learn from them and apply those lessons to product and website design. This is so important because to keep improving product and website designs, we've got to look for design inspiration in different places. In this video, I want to discuss Willy Fleckhaus's work. His name isn't often mentioned in the context of product and website design. I love Fleckhaus's mastery of layouts, his use of scale, and the way he integrated images and text into some compelling compositions. Designer and art director Willy Fleckhaus was born in Velbert, Germany in 1925. He became a prolific designer of books and magazines and one of the first art directors in Germany. His nickname was Germany's most expensive pencil, and he devoted a lifetime to perfecting his art. After beginning a career in journalism and covering various cultural and social topics, after World War II, Fleckhaus became fascinated by Swiss graphic design. This was the period of the international typographic style, with a minimalist approach pioneered by designers like Joseph Müller-Brockmann, Armin Hoffmann, and Massimo Vinelli. This group emphasized grids to order and structure content, and its modernist principles led to the influence of content-driven design, which is still relevant today. In the 1950s, the Swiss style influenced a new generation of graphic designers in the USA. They built on its modernist legacy and combined function with powerful imagery to create bold and imaginative designs. They often incorporated techniques like photomontage and new printing technologies. Perhaps Fleckhaus's enduring legacy was combining German, Swiss, and American graphic design styles to create something no one in Europe had seen. This is especially incredible for someone with no design experience or formal education when he took his first job at Auswärts magazine. I apologise now for my truly awful German pronunciation. When Fleckhaus began his career in design, magazines were laid out by typesetters who mostly worked separately from editors and writers. Over in America, in the 1950s, art directors like Bradbury Thompson took over creative control of the appearance of the magazines they worked on. As a former journalist, Fleckhaus knew the power of storytelling and intuitively understood how his medium could tell stories. He carefully selected imagery and used typography to communicate narratives more effectively than pictures and words alone. In 1953, Fleckhaus joined Twen, German for 20, and worked on the magazine until it closed in 1971. This magazine was aimed at the first generation of German post-war teens and young adults. Fleckhaus took the role of art director, a position that was unheard of in European publishing at the time. Only one other designer was so dominant, Alexei Brodovich at Harper's Bazaar magazine in New York. Twen was groundbreaking, stunning to look at, and sometimes even shocking to its post-war readership. In one issue, for an article titled Das Gesicht, the face, Fleckhaus used photography of his wife giving birth. On typography, Fleckhaus said, "If I take a short word and make its letters 30 centimeters high, it has an extraordinarily dramatic impact." There are several facets of Fleckhaus's design style which I especially enjoy. Contrasting scale was one particularly effective aspect. Fleckhaus often tightly cropped images and enlarged them to dominate his spreads. For example, the soccer ball on this double-page spread from Twen fills 5 of the 8 columns and displaces content in the 3 columns of text. The player is made deliberately small, adding to that sense of scale. Now, Notice how the larger drop cap at the story start and the headline at the end create a dynamic diagonal that pulls the eye across the article. Next time you're looking for a simple way to make a design feel different, try swapping the generic 12-column grid for one with 8 columns. Here, the larger football boot spans all 8, with the columns of running text exposing the grid structure. In this next spread devoted to Yves Montand, Fleckhaus used a similar technique with an extreme close-up of the French-Italian actor and singer. This design has a simple structure, but the text wraps around the small figure, making it feel looser and more organic. Then there's this characterful design featuring Mickey Mouse. Disney's most famous character dominates the 4-column layout, filling what would have been the recto page and stepping across the gutter onto the verso page. The text is small and split into columns, emphasizing the scale contrast between it and the illustration. But I also love the subtle design details, like the large rounded typeface of the 1950 headline, and how the text underneath it is center justified, which separates it from the article. Fleckhaus often placed his enlarged images so that they bled off the side of the page. For this article about the American jazz musician John Coltrane, Fleckhaus dropped his tightly cropped image from the top of the page to occupy 6 of the 8 columns. The single tall text column and pre-formatted headline emphasize the vertical direction in this design. Willy Fleckhaus didn't just apply his playful sense of scale to images, he often applied it to his typography. This enormous headline for the article Lourdes, set in Schmalfett grotesque, fills all 8 columns, and he balanced its visual weight with 8 columns of running text. Fleckhaus said, "When we make typography, we should understand that we're not just dealing with characters, but rather that our real goal is to give people pleasure, to inform and entertain them." Fleckhaus knew how scale could transform a design. He was a masterful layout designer, adept at packing designs with content. Whether for an editorial design or product pages in a store, there's so much that we can learn from Fleckhaus's work. For this design for an article about old-timer autos, he used a 6-column grid to present several images and running text, with his larger images spanning 2 columns. Now, there's currently no way that CSS can flow text between grid areas, but as a web page, this layout could easily contain lists of facts and figures, tables and other content to support the story. In this unusual composition, the Casimir Cardin cars arrive from the top, bottom and side. The structure consists of an 8-column grid, 4 on the verso page and 4 on the recto, which holds the running copy. I am constantly looking for alternatives to the full-width banners that have invaded the web like an invasive species. Placing a large image, like the one on the left, or a cutout image surrounded by white space can be good alternatives. Studying a designer's work in another medium and then applying what we learn to the web can be fun. Let's start with that design for the Casimir Cardin. It looks like a complex composition, but it could easily be accomplished using CSS. Like Willy Fleckhaus, I began with an 8-column grid for larger screens and blocked out the position of my images and text, which helped me decide their placement and proportions. Sometimes I'll do this with software. Other times I'll do it with pen and paper. A wireframe illustrates the structure, which will be helpful while designing and developing a design like this with HTML and CSS. It shows how, like Fleckhaus, I placed 2 vertical images of the Volkswagen Beetle across columns 1 and 2, then 3 and 4. I put another view of the Beetle horizontally with the copy underneath. You know, the 16:9 format of most computer monitors is something like that of a magazine spread. It's wide enough to make column grids, which are way more interesting than the 2, 3, or 4 blocks of components that designers drop into their designs. A composition can be excitingly different, even when it's based on a simple grid. Now, I bet I know what you're thinking. How can a design that looks like this be responsive? Well, having less space available needn't mean an uninspiring design. For my medium-sized version, I dropped the second group of 4 columns containing the text underneath the first group, which holds the 2 vertical beetles. I kept the copying columns, but moved the horizontal beetle image from above to below the text. For tiny screens, I simplified the designs, centered the 2-color headline, and using the HTML picture element, swapped the vertical beetles for horizontal versions and placed them into a sideways scrolling panel. Fleckhaus was skilled at filling his designs with images and text and keeping them organized with his grid, and there's plenty that we can learn from him about laying out editorial, product, and other content-rich pages. For his design for an article about cars from the old days, Fleckhaus used a 6-column grid, which is good if you're familiar with the 12-column grid which ships with most frameworks. Once again, I blocked out my content to refine the placement and proportions of my images and text. Large images span 2 columns. But while working on my wireframe, I decided to rotate one of the smaller images to contrast with my design's otherwise highly structural feel. The composition is relatively complex, but the column grid makes its content comprehensible. Like many of Fleckhaus's designs, the white space around images and text helps to prevent the layout from feeling overwhelming. People using medium-sized screens needn't miss out on this design, even though the arrangement they see will often differ from those using a large screen. I placed the 2 face-on Volkswagen Beetles side by side to form a banner graphic and repositioned the enlarged headline to fit underneath them. I also combined the 2 profile pictures of the Beetle into a single panel and placed that underneath my column of running text. Willy Fleckhaus used scale to enormous effect, and his extensive catalogue of work contains plenty that can inspire us to go big with our designs. The soccer ball on this double-page spread from Twen fills 5 of the 8 columns, and it displaces the content in the 3 columns of text. The player is deliberately small, which adds to that sense of scale. And I wanted to make a big impact, so I started with an 8-column grid that was inspired by this design. I blocked out space for my own large image by dedicating 5 of the 8 columns. Then I filled the remaining columns with content. My wireframe gives a better feel for the scale difference between my 2 Volkswagen Beetle images. Now, the Volkswagen Beetle became popular in America after some influential advertising, the Think Small campaign by Doyle Dane Bernbach. And I wanted my design to evoke that campaign with an unapologetically large beetle picture. I added leading lines under the smaller beetle to suggest that it was in motion. While the arrangement of elements will differ across various screen sizes, retaining the message communicated by a design is what's essential. When someone views a design using a medium-sized screen, they won't expect to see, or they possibly don't even know about, what it looks like on a large screen. The banner remains essentially the same for my medium-sized audience, but I simplified the rest of the page to fit the format better. It's also important to remember people who use extra large desktop displays. They're going to appreciate the extra work that goes into design details that make the most of their enlarged canvas, like dividing the running text into columns, which makes their reading experience more comfortable. Large-scale elements can have a big impact on a design's direction. For his design for Was Liebe nicht ist, What Love Is Not, Willy Fleckhaus placed the two faces facing off from opposite sides of the spread. This is just a fabulous example of how layout can support a narrative. Fleckhaus placed his copy into the center 2 of the 8-column grid. When I blocked out my content, I chose to do the same thing. In my wireframe, 2 Volkswagen Beetles face each other bonnet to bonnet, or hood to hood if you're American, with my text running between them. This design feels structured, but having lived with it for a time, I thought it lacked the tension of Fleckhaus's original. So I moved each car closer to the center and flowed my text between the car's bumpers or fenders to suggest that it was being displaced and squeezed by the vehicles. In this final example, Willy Fleckhaus laid a brush sideways over his text so that its paint dripped into one of the empty columns. I wondered if this design could influence something of mine, and then I realized it already had. I saw Fleckhaus's design and was inspired to create one for my Design Chatter group. That's a weekly forum for designers to get together, talk about their work and get constructive feedback. It's online and on Zoom, and it's free to join. So go to designchatter.online and maybe I'll see you there. Willy Fleckhaus and his designs can teach us a great deal about improving our work on the web today. Although his name is not commonly associated with product and web design, his designs can be influential. There's an excellent book about Fleckhaus's work, Design, Revolt, Rainbow, packed with examples from his career, and I'll add links down in the description. So, if you like this video, please like it, subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when the next one's available. What do you think about Willy Fleckhaus's work? Could it inspire what you're working on? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.